from your favorite source for Chicago White Sox talk, delivering news, interviews, analysis, and more. This is the Sox Machine Podcast with your hosts, Jim Margulis and Josh Nelson.
Thanks, Rob, and welcome to the Sox Machine Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Nelson, as we bring you a new episode this Monday, February 6, 2023, just a week before pitchers report to spring training camp. They'll be participating in the World Baseball Classic, which those games will be happening in mid-March, and then a couple days later, you're going to have the position players show up to spring training camp, and then everyone's going to show up to spring training and get started, and then we'll get our spring training coverage started. So this is one of the few podcasts before we shift gears and really get ready to go for the 2023 season. So what are we going to talk about in this episode? Well, the White Sox made another trade to help bolster the depth in the bullpen. There was a previous trade during the White Sox rebuild years that did not age well for the White Sox. We'll talk about that. And there's some TV drama to discuss. Jason Benetti and the White Sox negotiations. MLB Network no longer on YouTube TV. Bally Sports, the whole regional sports network, may come down as they declare bankruptcy soon. There's a lot going on the TV front. So let's get started. Joining me is the managing editor of SoxMachine.com. It is Jim Margulis. And Jim, let's get started with the trade the White Sox made. It's minor on the scale as they made a deal with the Boston Red Sox, acquiring right-handed reliever Franklin Germain, a right-handed reliever, again, in exchange for Theo Dunlinger for the White Sox. So the most important question, with Dunlinger gone, who is going to be the White Sox new blacksmith?
Resident blacksmith is a great thing to have on a business card. Although amateur blacksmith always reminds me of when I lived in upstate New York and a guy set half of a small city on fire because he was trying to forge a sword in a trash can. I forget the name of the show that he got inspired by, but yeah, like it sounds like something like a Mrs. O'Leary cow type thing, to where like, 100 years from now, they're going to say like, oh, that's not the way that happened, but no, it actually happened that way. I'll have to find that. I forget the name of the reality show, but yes, it always reminds, whenever I hear amateur blacksmith, I always think of the Cohoes fire.
Unbelievable. I have to see this story now. Oh my gosh. I'm sorry, everyone. Baseball talk is over. I need to find this story about a guy trying to forge a sword in a trash can and almost setting the entire city ablaze.
Forged in Fire. That was the name of the show. And
Forged in Fire.
Headline from the Albany Times Union, my former workplace: sword forger pleads guilty in massive Cohoes fire case.
Oh my gosh. Well, hopefully Theo Dunlinger doesn't set ablaze whatever affiliate that he joins with the Boston Red Sox. But let's talk about the White Sox new pitcher that they acquired, Germain. His four-seam fastball in the few appearances that he had with the Boston Red Sox last year averaged 97.7 miles per hour. So that's good velocity, and his slider hovers around 87 miles per hour. And he's got a show-me changeup that he throws against left-handed batters. But he got roughed up in 5 appearances with the Boston Red Sox. He allowed 8 earned runs, 2 home runs while walking 4 and striking out 4. And in his time with the Red Sox, originally Germain was drafted by the Yankees, and this is a kid that grew up in the Bronx, so that was a big deal, getting drafted out of North Florida to join the Yankees. But he found his way with the Boston Red Sox system, and the Red Sox in 2022 took Germain, originally a starting pitcher, and moved him into the bullpen, and he made 32 appearances last year at AAA for the Red Sox affiliate. He posted a 2.58 ERA. That's pretty good, with 46 strikeouts of 16 walks over 38 innings, and he was 7 for 8 in save opportunities, and he's also got 3 options remaining. So with this particular deal, again, it is a minor deal, but it is one that I like because we've been talking about this all offseason, our concern about the overall pitching depth for the White Sox. And here, this seems to be a move that the White Sox are trying to protect themselves in case if someone like Liam Hendriks is gone for the entire season as he battles against cancer, but also hedges in case if any other major injuries arise.
Yeah, it's so, well, I think one is we're going to be interested to see like how they actually pronounce German's name. I'm under the impression it's German, like the language.
Yeah, I'm sorry,
but
German.
Also like it's been weird and all over the place in videos, but like the official, if you can trust MLB.com pronunciation. It's German, like the language, but I was going to say Hermann off the, just based on, my guess based on other players with that name, but no, apparently it's German. So we'll see if that's right, or whether this is going to be a case where it's like Luis Robert, where nobody's actually sure years later if they're actually saying his name right. So, to be determined. But to your point about bullpen depth, it seems like, with the way the White Sox bullpen is constructed, that there is still no natural, I guess like fill in for Liam Hendricks. I don't think, there would be. Like, it's hard to replace a guy like Hendricks when it comes to both his stuff and the fact that he's been a successful closer for years now. Most guys who are successful closers for years have gotten the chance. It's closers learn by doing job. You don't find till somebody's got the stuff until they actually show that they are actually able to do it. So, when you look at Kendall Graveman or Joe Kelly or Aaron Bummer, or just, down the line, Reynaldo Lopez, like, we'll find out who is going to get the most chances with regularity. But it does give Pedro Grifol and Rick Hahn a lot of flexibility on the other end of the bullpen when it comes to just guys that can cycle in and out of that last spot. Like Nick Avila, who's a real 5 draft pick, who, if the White Sox don't want to lose him and they think that he can, hold down a job, like, he needs a roster spot. And so, like, we'll find out when spring training arrives, like, what he actually has, and whether, that's just a random flirtation with a guy who's not ready for major league pitching appearances yet. But when it comes to the other, like, guys they've acquired, Gregory Santos and AJ Alexy, we talked about last week, now they're starting to have guys who are, who can fill in for a week or two and see if there's anything more. They also had Tanner Banks, who's not really in the picture right now. Matt Foster is not really in the picture for the time being. So they have guys the White Sox have seen who are on their outside looking in. Now they have a couple more, except with, bigger fastballs, and haven't been able to find that, like, kind of slider to complement those fastballs yet. But certainly have the kind of arm to where, like, if the White Sox had somebody like German or had somebody like Santos and another team traded for him, you'd understand why. They're one light bulb flash away from being like, oh, now you're a 7th inning guy, or now you're an 8th inning guy, because they're throwing 97, 98, and you just didn't have the hand position right on the slider. So that's kind of what we're looking here with all these guys that they've brought in. Is it's not going to answer the immediate void in the closer role, but they basically had Jose Ruiz for that job, and that's it. Now they have like 3 Jose Ruizes, which is not bad. Like, it's not great. They all may be Jose Ruiz or worse. You can't give them anything beyond a low leverage appearance with any regularity, but it's more than they had before.
On the bullpen side, at least in relievers, the White Sox have depth that goes into Charlotte, and whoever doesn't make the roster, the Charlotte Knights are getting better quality pitchers than they had last year. The issue still is on the starting pitching front, where we are looking at Davis Martin, and James Fegan of The Athletic wrote a feature profile on Sean Burke, and we could possibly see Matthew Thompson part of the White Sox rotation this year in case of injuries arise, or there's double headers and you need emergency starters. So on the starting pitching front, the depth is still a concern, but at least on the bullpen side, even with the White Sox losing Liam Hendricks for an undisclosed amount of time as he battles against cancer, they have options to rotate in and out, while Kendall Graveman, Reynaldo Lopez, Joe Kelly, Aaron Bummer, they get shifted down later in games in those high leverage situations, taking on the role, whoever, maybe by committee, from Liam Hendricks.
Yeah, and Garrett Crochet we haven't mentioned either, like, as somebody who probably isn't in the immediate picture, but a couple months in can rotate in and out with those other guys.
And again, they used a pretty high draft pick on him, and the comp that I had when he was at Tennessee is a Josh Hader type or an Andrew Miller type. So if he's ready to go and he's healthy, in June he's throwing 99, 100 miles per hour again, Jim. And if the White Sox are having 9th inning issues, I wouldn't mind giving Garrett Crochet an opportunity to close out some games if those opportunities arise. We know that, again, with Josh Hader, left-handed relievers can be effective when they are closing out games in Major League Baseball. So that's the new guy. Let's talk about an old friend officially. Blake Rutherford is signing with the Washington Nationals. So he leaves the White Sox farm system. And let's revisit that trade, Jim, because this happened in 2017. And I remember fondly when this trade happened that it really felt like a salary dump because the White Sox sent David Robertson and Todd Frazier, two of the more expensive players for that 2017 payroll. And they also attached Tommy Kahnle in order to sweeten the pot for the Yankees to take on the salaries of Robertson and Frazier. And the White Sox received Blake Rutherford, Ian Clarkin, Tito Polo, and Tyler Clippard.
Oh, Clippy.
Clippy. And this trade did not work well for the White Sox, as you wrote on Sunday, Jim, revisiting that the only one that made it to the majors was old Clippy for the White Sox. They didn't get much out of this deal.
They did not. And yeah, looking back at my writing at the time when that happened and just trying to figure out like my first guesses, because it's easy to look back when a prospect doesn't pan out and say, what was that all about? But it really like that. I remember going back to that offseason thinking like it felt like David Robertson and Todd Frazier and Tommy Kahnle should have at least been two separate deals. I have high hopes for Frazier just because he was kind of being paid more or less market rates and like an okay third baseman who can hit the occasional homer, but also pops up too many pitches and hits 220. Like, some team can probably use a guy like him to fill a spot, but isn't going to drive a big deal on his own. And Robertson was also like a market rate closer, who is just going to be, fine for another team, but not necessarily going to be, the lockdown, you're recording the last out of a World Series, based on the strength of his own arsenal. He was fine, but also getting paid quite a bit. So it felt like, when they included Tommy Kahnle, who was actually like emerging as a possible high leverage guy at the time and still had years of team control left and wasn't going to arbitration yet. Like it seemed like you're dragging down his value by including those other two guys with him. And the White Sox seem to go for, like, I reduced it basically Tommy Kahnle for Blake Rutherford, and everybody else is just noise. It was Robertson and Frazier for, Clarkin, Polo, and Clippard, which maybe felt like, if you broke it down into those two deals, it's like, Kahnle for Rutherford seems fair. Just having, one for one. But then, like, Robertson, Frazier is kind of like getting rid of them, like you mentioned, salary dump. So that, it was a little bit disappointing at the time. But then like Rutherford, like had some prospect, stock still, like he wasn't, nobody's completely writing him off, but the question was like, will he be able to tap into his power enough to play a corner spot in the major leagues? Or will he just be like a poor man's Ryan Sweeney? If you remember him, just, can play a little bit of center, but is more a corner guy who, can hit righties, but he doesn't crush righties. And so he's just somebody like a second division fourth outfielder, just somebody who doesn't do anything well enough to hold down a spot for a contender. And that's kind of what he turned out to be, except maybe even less so just because the power just really never showed up. And so he's just more or less a guy who could start for the Barons and really not bother you.
So at one point, the White Sox had 4 first rounders from the 2016 Major League Baseball draft, Jim. Zach Collins, Zach Birdie, Dane Dunning, and Blake Rutherford. And out of those 4, the one that provided the biggest impact was Dane Dunning because he landed in Lance Lynn. Oh, man.
And he was also drafted the lowest of those 4.
He was.
Right?
Yes.
29th, yes.
So, like, and we said this back in the day as well when they had 2 first-round picks in 2016. You don't get many opportunities to have 2 first-round picks. You cannot fail. You cannot screw it up. And, of course, they screwed it up. So this is not I would say you would not call this a player development win, Jim, when at one point you had 4 first-rounders of this draft class. And you took one who was promising in 2020, and you leveraged that to Lance Lynn. Okay, so that was a good move. And I think Dunning could still have... Mm-hmm. He could have staying power in the major leagues as a back-end type of rotation guy for the Texas Rangers. But Collins, Birdie, and Rutherford, like, how were you not able to develop one of these 3 guys into something that could still be part of a major league roster? Because all 3 of them are going to be stuck in quadruple A hell for the rest of their careers.
Yeah, I guess the one thing you might defend the White Sox front office with is that draft, that first round at least, is pretty spotty when it comes to success rate. Like a lot of guys who just have never hit, like Will Smith, 32nd pick for the Dodgers. He's number one, the clear number one of those picks. When it comes to production, Cal Quantrill, number 2, and then Gavin Lux, number 3, tied with Dylan Carlson. So the Dodgers have 2 of the 3 most productive players from that draft, and they actually drafted 2 of those 3 players. But the rest of it's still like, yeah, I'm not sure if there are any guys. Kind of reminds me a little bit of the Gordon Beckham draft, where just like, very few, like Buster Posey turned out, but like very few were just, they hung around for a while. You felt okay about some guys, like some guys were major leaguers, but nobody really crushing it. And when you look at the draft, you had like Ian Anderson, who's been mostly good, but he's had some stumbles. Corey Ray, who, I remember the White Sox being tied to, and everybody wanted him because he's an ace product, would have been a good story. Like, he's only been in 1 major league game. A lot of guys who, Kyle Lewis had injury problems. It's been a ragged first round, I think, when it comes to that draft and not really having much going for it. I'm looking at the second round here. Second round, a whole lot better. Pete Alonso, Brian Reynolds, Bo Bichette. You top 3 most productive picks. So the 3 most productive picks of the second round are better than any of the top picks, unless you give, maybe you give Will Smith some extra credit for being a catcher and taking a wins above replacement hit that way because of games played. But otherwise, that first round as a whole, aside from the Dodgers, really nobody covered themselves in glory. Cal Quantrill, he's with the Guardians now. So even the Padres can't really claim him because that trade doesn't look so great.
Well, the Quantrill was interesting at that moment because he had Tommy John. So there was a lot of secrecy of what was going on, and people were surprised when the Padres selected him so high. Gavin Lux had an audition, a tryout with the White Sox at Guarantee Rate Field a week before the Major League Baseball draft, in which they're probably kicking themselves still, not taking him. But I don't think they thought that Collins was worthy of the 10th overall pick more than Gavin Lux. And boy, the White Sox could really use Gavin Lux right now. I can't use that as an excuse for the White Sox because they identified and targeted these guys, Jim.
Yeah.
In those trades in the rebuild. Like the White Sox amateur scouting department liked this draft class so much that they convinced Rick Hahn to continue adding first rounders when they were making trades. And here we are 6 years later, in 2023. And not looking so hot. And, the trade ends up just being a salary dump when we look back in the history books. And unfortunately, Blake Rutherford never reaches the major leagues with the Chicago White Sox. Only Clippy out of the 4 reached the major league. So it ends up being one big salary dump. But it does make me wonder, if you go back in time, if the White Sox just work harder, and maybe they would be better off if they just kept Tommy Kahnle, Jim.
Yeah, he's had his own rocky road because he's had some, Tommy John surgery and such. So it hasn't been smooth for him. So it's like a case, like it reminds me a little bit of the Nick Madrigal trade, where it's like they were okay trading him when they did. Because, if they had some fears that his arm would not hold up or his delivery was a ticking time bomb for like a major procedure, then they timed it right. It's just more of a matter of like, packaging him up with guys who didn't really have a whole lot of value themselves might have hurt. But now looking at the first round there, and let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 out of 41 picks, only 7 have not made the major leagues one way or another. And Blake Rutherford is one of those 7. I guess Riley Pint, number 4 with the Rockies, like he did not get there at all. I don't think he's come close. But just the, not making it to the majors is, a little bit troubling. And as you mentioned, the fact that the White Sox went 0 for 4 rather than 0 for 1, it's a lottery, but it's not like, a lottery to where like your odds are, 1 in 3 billion. And if you get 2 tickets is 1 in 1.5 billion. Like, no, the numbers get in your favor the more you acquire, as long as you're taking shots at the right guys. So it's not a great one. Not a great turn for the Nick Hostetler era.
No, that's why there's a new director of amateur scouting now for the White Sox.
Yeah, I remember the quote about, Zach Collins, like, they would have drafted him first if they had the first overall pick. I'm like, yeah, it was a kind of a silly quote at the time. And now it's just like, it's, you don't say that. I think about a guy you're happy drafting 10th.
Well, the guy after him won the Rookie of the Year over Luis Robert.
Yeah.
Even though it was the shortened 2020 season, and he's fallen out of favor with Seattle because of injuries, and they got this wonder kid in Julio Rodriguez, who is just a stud and a superstar. But, I mean, Kyle Lewis has had more of an impact to the majors than Zach Collins. Yeah, it's funny to me that now the Blake Rutherford era is over, and I read your column on Sunday, and I just wanted to revisit that point as far as in White Sox history, that at one time the White Sox had 4 first rounders in their farm system, part of their organization, from the 2016 Major League Baseball draft, and got nothing except for Lance Lynn. So thank you, Dane. But other than Dane Dunning, nothing from the other 3. Well, it's always fun to go back in memory lane, and these lessons are important, especially with upcoming moves the White Sox will be possibly making. We'll see where the franchise is after their contention window. Hopefully they learn from some of these lessons. But Jim and I will take a quick break. When we come back, let's talk about the TV woes that are going on in Major League Baseball. There's trouble boiling right now with the regional sports networks. The White Sox don't make it easy for Jason Benetti to return, and no more MLB Network on YouTube TV. I got a lot of problem with this TV news, and you're going to hear about it next on the Sox Machine Podcast. Welcome back to the Sox Machine Podcast. All right, so let's talk about TV and baseball. This is starting to become a really hot topic across Major League Baseball, but let's start local and then grow to the national level. And local means the White Sox booth itself. We got the good news that both Jason Benetti and Steve Stone signed a multi-year agreement to come back to continue calling games for the Chicago White Sox on TV. And that is good news, Jim, because Benetti's awesome and he's well liked across the entire country. I love seeing tweets, especially when games are on MLB Network. And the White Sox are showed up and everybody raves about Benetti, and they tune in to watch the White Sox because of the television booth between Benetti and Stone. And Benetti has brought something out of Steve Stone that we did not see when Steve Stone was paired with Hawk Harrelson. But here comes this story out of the Chicago Sun-Times, and it is really interesting, and the article's well done, by the way, in showing the frustration that Benetti had. And I don't know, how would you describe the White Sox point of view with Brooks Boyer? Like, how would you describe on how they viewed these contentious negotiations?
The way the White Sox viewed him is almost like, Benetti doesn't have a union, but it almost feels like union busting.
Okay.
Kind of like, what do you need somebody to negotiate with you for? Don't you trust us enough? Don't you think we have your best interest in mind?
Yeah, Brooks Boyer comes off really tone deaf. And here are the 2 quotes in the Sun-Times article that I think highlights this. So the first one's from Jason Benetti, and he told the Sun-Times, the really good news is we got somewhere good. It was kind of a pain, really. There were some things that we had to get through that I thought were silly, and I'm sure they thought some of the stuff that I was talking about might have been silly, but we got there in the end, end quote. So it was a painful experience for Jason Benetti. Brooks Boyer, quote, I don't think there are any complications to it. It really wasn't much of a negotiation because we had picked up the option. It was just ironing out how we put his national schedule in our local schedule. So there really wasn't anything that sticks out that was bothersome to me, end quote. So it's just like, your star broadcaster, the process was frustrating. It was not a lot of fun. It was painful for me, but I'm glad we got something done. The White Sox, I don't know what he's talking about. We thought it worked out pretty well. Just like tone deaf.
Yeah, I have a problem with the other quote, which I think you're going to get to, right?
Oh, yes.
When it comes up.
Yeah, so, okay, let's get into this one. Because Brooks Boyer unintentionally opened up Pandora's box here. And Brooks Boyer told the Sun-Times, because the White Sox don't negotiate with broadcasters' agents. So in the world of media, especially in Chicago, a lot of personalities have agents. they negotiate on behalf of the media personality with the TV station or radio station to work out deals, because sometimes negotiations can be contentious, and your broadcasting agent, if you are on multiple TV stations or multiple radio stations, can aid you with scheduling so there are no conflicts. And it's, easy for you as a broadcaster to do what you do best, which is broadcasting, not contract negotiating. And the White Sox, they don't negotiate with broadcasters' agents, so that's incredibly weird to me. And Benetti joked that he felt like he was a player in arbitration. And Boyer disagreed with that. And Boyer's quote in the Sun-Times, he said, whether it's Kenny Williams or Rick Hahn, they don't use agents. We're compensating them. We have a partnership with them. There's never been a need to have any sort of outside entity come in and negotiate these things. What, Jim?
Yeah, that's the quote I had a problem with, because I can see, when it comes to trying to manage a national broadcast schedule versus a local one and making sure all your dates are covered, and, not wanting to let... if it comes down like 120 games versus 133, I can see that being like a, real negotiation, a point of contention and back and forth and trying to manage between two parties, and some feelings being either hurt or, everybody wanting to feel like they're the priority. So I can see some differences there, but that's the quote, both saying like you can't have an agent negotiate for you, and then likening Jason Benetti, who's in demand, who has plenty of experience working with other broadcast teams, other companies, radio, TV, ESPN, Fox Sports. He had an agent negotiate his latest Fox Sports football deal, and he mentioned him in the stories talking about the contract he got becoming Fox's number 2 college football guy. So that's how, I guess big operations deal with it. They work with agents. That's fine. That's, as you mentioned, a lot of guys have it, and somebody as in demand as Benetti, and somebody who he said he worked 190 to 200 games last year between sports and seasons. You probably have to have an agent to some regard just to manage the schedule and make sure somebody else is checking your math to make sure you can be in all these places and not have to, clone yourself in order to meet your contractual obligations. So I can see why it'd be helpful to have somebody managing Benetti's schedule. So, having the White Sox come in and say we don't need an agent, and Kenny Williams and Rick Hahn don't. And Kenny Williams isn't going to work anywhere else, at least when it comes to his schedule his title as the executive vice president. And then Rick Hahn is not going to get a GM job anywhere else. And also Rick Hahn is a former agent. That was his job before coming to the White Sox. He worked for a sports agency. So if he's going to represent himself, he's probably as equipped to.
Right.
Yeah. But, we never hear about their contract statuses because nobody would ever make it public, because if we knew this is the last year of Rick Hahn's contract, everybody's saying, let him go. And saying to Kenny Williams, same thing. You would see, the sell the team signs would be, kind of floating around, except just saying you don't have to fire him, just let the contract lapse. So, but we never hear about that. So yeah, it just, Jeff Agrest, who is the, Chicago Sun-Times media reporter.
Oh, thank you.
He said that the Atlanta Braves were kind of hanging out, waiting to see if Benetti would become available because they lost Chip Carey to the St. Louis Cardinals, because the Cardinals spot opened up because of their play-by-play guy is a repeat drunk driver or DUI offender. So they had to let him go. And, Chip Carey came in, and so Braves job opened up, and the Braves are looking to see, and that's what happens when you have talent, is other teams want you and other teams will make offers. So, when it comes to the White Sox, likening, two, basically office fixtures in Williams and Hahn, and, they're not going to work anywhere else, at least for their titles, and they never go anywhere. And, the White Sox are never going to fire them and say yeah, they're happy. Of course they are, because they wouldn't have their jobs anywhere else. Jason Benetti could have his job with at least we know one other team, but give other organizations a little bit of a prep time, to get their ducks in a row. You probably have half dozen teams, 10 teams looking to line up Jason Benetti to be their play-by-play guy. So yeah, that was the tone deaf part to me.
if I were Jason Benetti, and I should preface by saying that Jason's been good to us and he's reached out via DMs over the years as White Sox broadcaster. We love his work. And I'm very glad that he is the play-by-play guy for the Chicago White Sox. And I want him to stay as long as he can possibly stay with the White Sox. He makes it a lot easier to watch the White Sox on TV, no matter how good or how bad the quality of players are on the field. With that being said, Jason Benetti, I believe, is on the Joe Buck path. Joe Buck was the St. Louis Cardinals announcer, taking over his dad. Then he gets gigs with Fox, and he becomes the big national broadcaster that we have known over the decades, calling the Super Bowl and the World Series. And I think Jason Benetti will be on that path, and he'll be even more in demand on the national level. And the national games, they pay more. It's just they pay more. So it's going to be more attractive for him to do those games. If I were Jason Benetti, I would be on Zillow checking out condos and houses in Atlanta. I would be gone, honestly, Jim, if I were Jason Benetti, if this is how the White Sox are going to negotiate with me. Because if Fox has no problem negotiating with my agent to work out any kinks in the schedule that I may have or any conflicts there could possibly be, I got to work with another professional organization then to call baseball games because I am in demand. And there is an opening right now with the Atlanta Braves. The Atlanta Braves, a World Series contender, a legit World Series contender, not pretending that they are a competitive team coming into 2023 that is stacked with young talent that's under control for upcoming years. I'm sorry, Jim. I know we should be rooting for the White Sox and saying that the White Sox should have the best possible guys, but looking at this objectively, if I were Jason Benetti, I'd be in Atlanta. I'm sorry. I'd be on Zillow. I'd be shopping condos right now. I would be in Atlanta if I were Jason Benetti.
The quotes I mentioned in my write-up of it was when Benetti was talking to Danny Parkins on 670 The Score, and he mentioned that it was a wide-ranging conversation, so it wasn't like directly said about his negotiations with the White Sox. He mentioned that he likes being as visible as he is and calling as many games as he can possibly do because he is positive representation for people with cerebral palsy. And, he's somebody who's, doing just thriving, despite, what he has to deal with. And he wants to show other people in similar situations that he can be, or that they can be, just as a force in their occupations. So that's why he's driven. So it wasn't like, saying this in direct relation to what the White Sox did, but he talked about like how he thought that, the quote is, "In the end, in a faulty way, I assumed in the back of my mind that if you get really, really good at something, people are going to stop assuming things about you. That's definitely not true." Or like when they're going to stop trying to push you around. That's not true. People see how I walk. It's amazing. When I'm at the airport, I walk by people who are like those free credit card people, and they have like a 5,000 points if you sign up today thing. I always get stopped by those people because they think I'm an easy mark. Like that, that's what he said. And like, it wasn't directly pertaining to the White Sox negotiations, but it felt like it could apply, or that like, he's at the risk of like I wouldn't say the White Sox are taking advantage of him because they did give him like the platform of calling White Sox games. And, they very much put his talent first, and they look at it like, here's a great story, or look at the great thing we're doing. They believed in Jason Benetti, the talent. So I don't think they have taken it easy on him, or at least the way they've handled his position in the past, they haven't really, to my, perhaps like, he sees it differently, but just outwardly, I don't see a case where like they've really taken advantage of just trying to, make themselves look like the good guys because they hired him in the first place. Like everything's been about the talent, and it's been a great partnership up until this point. But, he talked about just feeling like, having a heightened sensitivity to when he could possibly be taken advantage of. And, so I imagine even if the White Sox aren't doing it, he's just used to it, looking at it that way. And that's something to where like, if you're managing the talent, and if you're managing, negotiating with people, like that's part of the people that you have to work with, is just their past experiences. And so like, if you're making him kind of bring these things to mind, even indirectly, it's like, it's not great. And that's another case for having an agent involved is just like, fewer hurt feelings, like having your hard talk with that guy in order to make sure that, paid negotiator, you're getting paid to negotiate with them. You don't have to like them. You just have to get a deal done. And you have to like Benetti, and Benetti has to like you, and everybody in between can, roll up their sleeves and exchange some bruises and ultimately be fine with it. So I don't get it on both sides, really. Like, it doesn't seem like it's helpful for attracting good talent, and it doesn't seem like it's just, good managing of people. So yeah, I really don't understand it. And I wonder, if Benetti is just talking like this, one, because like he's on an upward trajectory and doesn't need the White Sox. But also I wonder if it's partially, this is me entirely speculating, that he cares about the White Sox and is like, I have the leverage to call them out and try to get them out of this like small time behavior that limits them in so many other regards. And, maybe I get fired, or maybe they, let me go and they don't renew my contract or make it worse for me and make me want to walk away. Kind of like, we've seen Jerry Reinsdorf do with other prominent employees who, felt like they were getting too sweet of a deal. This is something we're used to, but like, he just might be saying like, I have the leverage to call them out a little bit, so I'm going to call them out and see if anything can shake them out of the way they do business, because it doesn't really hurt me either way. I can get this job anywhere else. And the fact that he's with the White Sox shows that he cares, because like, this is his audience. This is his, he's got a connection with it. And I imagine like you want to keep that if at all possible. And especially if you're getting paid market rate and everything, and you can get all the jobs you want. Like, I imagine there's an appeal to the White Sox. This isn't just like doing a favor for White Sox fans. Like, there's something in it for him too, but there's certainly a case where like, if it does get bad, or like, if they do keep trying to nickel and dime him, like he probably doesn't have it in him to like do it again. That is kind of my read on it.
It's home. He grew up in the area. He grew up a White Sox fan. This is what he wanted to do as a kid. But the reality is that in media, it's all about contracts. And if you can't get a good enough deal, or you get a better deal to do something else that pays you more, and you get an opportunity to call bigger games, no matter what the sport is, yeah, you have to walk away from the childhood dream. That's something that Joe Buck had to do, leaving the St. Louis Cardinals booth. And maybe one day Jason Benetti will have to do that with the Chicago White Sox as he continues to get better and he continues to get bigger on the national landscape, especially with Fox. And here's the juxtaposition with all this. So we're talking about the White Sox here. Mm-hmm. The Dodgers, and they have Joe Davis, who's number one for Fox when it comes to national baseball, and he's calling NFL games as well. I think he's number two as the NFL broadcaster for Fox. And he's going to be missing quite a few games to the Los Angeles Dodgers. The Dodgers. He replaced Vin Scully. And you know what the Dodgers did? They didn't throw a hissy fit if Joe Davis is leaving. They understood. So what they did is they hired one of our friends, Steven Nelson, who is now going to be Joe Davis's replacement. So Steven Nelson is going from the East Coast doing MLB Network stuff, and now he's going to be calling Los Angeles Dodgers games. And I know he listens from time to time. So Steven, huge congratulations for you. That is big time for you to get that gig. Mm-hmm. But it's just hilarious to me that we're talking it from a White Sox perspective, and Brooks Boyer's like, agent, why do you need to talk to an agent? Meanwhile, one of, if not the most popular team in Major League Baseball, has no problem with it at all. And they just hire a high quality backup broadcaster when Joe's got to leave and do other work. Like it's no problem at all with the Los Angeles Dodgers. It's just, I don't know. It's hilarious to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, like Vin Scully, it's similar to the White Sox in that like Vin Scully cannot be replaced. Hawk Harrelson, who the White Sox had, could not be directly replaced. Like he's one of a kind. They don't make him like that anymore. Yeah. And that's, I think the people who don't like Benetti and the people who miss Hawk is just like that's a bygone era. Really. It's like Syracuse voices or, professional voices are pretty much the norm now. And you might get some weird guy who slips through the cracks and runs with it. But right now, like professional voices are kind of the standard here. So like, the Dodgers going from Vin Scully, who was like, a Dodger since Brooklyn and not going, he worked, World Series games. But then, as he aged into his 80s, like he was just Dodgers all the way, and then Dodgers home games, and then reduced schedule, but he was just going to be the Dodgers and nobody else. And then they shifted Joe Davis, who, as you mentioned, works a whole bunch of other dates, and they make it work. And like the White Sox, they had Hawk Harrelson, who, turned into like one of Jerry Reinsdorf's attack dogs. Basically, like he would, he was fiercely defensive of the organization, and not just a homer, but also like a homer who rail against people who did Jerry Reinsdorf wrong, even if he devoted his Hawk Day speech to talking about like Don Fair in the 1984 strike and why Jerry Reinsdorf wasn't to blame, even though he was. Just like that's how, that's what they had in Hawk Harrelson. Ed Farmer was his own, like just, not going anywhere guy, just, fiercely loyal to the organization. And, Harrelson retired and Farmer's gone. And, now they have Jason Benetti, who is just, he's the new guy, and he has a new approach, and he has, he's got other jobs. He's got, a much higher profile, and he has an agent. He's not going to be Hawk Harrelson, so they don't have to negotiate with him like they negotiate with Hawk Harrelson, because, there isn't going to be another Hawk Harrelson, both in terms of voice and style, but also just how close he was to Jerry Reinsdorf and how fiercely and kind of insanely devoted and defensive he was of the White Sox. Like, you have to develop that over decades. You can't assume the new guy is going to just step in and be like, okay, he's going to be, Jerry Reinsdorf's guy now. Like, no, he's, especially if he can get jobs elsewhere, like, and he's still, trying to establish his place in the broadcast hierarchy. Like, he's got to look out for himself until he gets comfortable and realizes, like, I've done everything I want to do, and it's White Sox games from here on out.
Again, I'm happy that Jason is here, but if I were Jason, I would be in Atlanta. That's just me personally. But yeah, so Jason Benetti's back, and the White Sox are not only weird when they're negotiating with free agents, they're also weird negotiating with their own damn employees and their contracts.
It's just so small. That's a word that keeps coming to me, just like small.
It's just not in base. You know what this story does? It just shines a light on. It's just not baseball ops. It kind of reeks throughout every level of the White Sox organization. And that's not good. That is not good. All right. Speaking of not good, we'll quickly touch on MLB Network's removed on YouTube TV. And I have YouTube TV, and I know a lot of our listeners have YouTube TV.
I do as well.
It's a great resource if you're cutting the cord, at least with cable. You're just sticking with internet to help cut costs, and you can have it on your phone and your tablet. When I go in San Diego, I can still keep the local channels on the thing because it knows that I'm traveling, and it's such a great streaming platform. And I'm fingers crossed MLB Network returns to YouTube TV, but it kind of sucks, Jim. And if it doesn't get back onto YouTube TV when the regular season starts, typically my process is, especially when the White Sox are on the road, is that when the White Sox game is over, I'll watch MLB Tonight, and that's how I get to watch a lot of the late night games and watching highlights and getting former players, ex-players analysis on what they're watching live. And it opens up the doors to a lot of other players that, especially in the West Coast games, that I don't get to see on a daily basis. And if it doesn't return, that's where it's going to hurt me. But yeah, it's kind of a bummer. MLB Network's been removed as we are approaching spring training.
I don't watch a whole lot of TV casually on YouTube TV. Like I like it for the cloud service. That's kind of how it's very easy to record shows you watch and catch up and such. So like, to me, it's it's more convenient for watching things after the fact. But yeah, it's like part of the reason I got YouTube TV was that it had an MLB Network. And it's just, cutting the cord, briefly looked like a great idea, and now it's just turning into as expensive and convoluted as actually having cable, just because it all comes back to like trying to chase money the same way, and the rights fees and everything like that are still negotiated by the same people. So it's just, there's a limited amount of time where I think when it comes to TV broadcast, TV networks, that everything looks okay, and then something shifts and the profits aren't what they used to be. And all of a sudden things are turned on their heads. They have to look elsewhere. And that's, I think, where we're going next with the conversation because of Bally Sports.
Yeah, so speaking of Bally Sports, the regional sports network woes and troubles for Major League Baseball really ramping up. And I think the best story, and there's been a lot of stories and a lot of business outlets, financial publications have been tracking this story because there's a lot of money involved. But I have to give a shout out to Ben Clemens of Fangraphs.com because I think he wrote it up the best, encompassing everything that's involved and how ultimately it impacts baseball fans. So boiling it down to as simple of terms as I could possibly provide, 14 Major League Baseball teams are on Bally Sports. And Bally Sports is ran by the Diamond Sports Group, and it's a subsidiary of Sinclair. And Sinclair also owns part of the Yes Network and the Marquee Network for the Chicago Cubs. And it's been reported that the Diamond Sports Group will soon declare bankruptcy. And 4 of those 14 teams are in the American League Central: Cleveland, Minnesota, Detroit, Kansas City, even still continuing local, the Milwaukee Brewers are on it. Bally Sports, San Diego, they spent all this money on players. They're on Bally Sports. So there's a lot of teams, almost half the league here is sweating because there's just not a lot of certainty coming into the season of what's going on with their local TV deals. And the most pressing question for these teams, if they declare bankruptcy, are we getting our local rights fees paid out? Because like the Brewers reported just renewed their deal with Bally Sports in 2021, and they're getting between $40 to $50 million. I will tell you this, if the Milwaukee Brewers do not get that $40 to $50 million in 2023, that really hurts them as an organization. And it ties up to what they could possibly do in the near future. And that could have significant impact, no matter what other TV deals Major League Baseball has negotiated with Peacock to do the Sunday morning games, which, by the way, Jason Benetti will be calling those. Apple TV games, the new deal with Fox, the new deal with ESPN. Like the local TV deals are really big for these organizations. And I think this is something on the business front when it comes to Major League Baseball, Jim, post-lockout. This could have a lot of impact in the league and something we're going to have to pay attention to, even though the White Sox own somewhat their regional sports network. They share ownership with the Chicago Bulls, the Chicago Blackhawks of NBC Sports Chicago that's ran by Comcast and NBC. But for 14 teams in the league, this is going to be a really hot topic and pressing situation.
Especially since, like, it seems, I would say, more than coincidental that Artie Moreno with the Angels withdrew his plans to sell the Angels. And I think the Nationals are doing the same thing, like, holding off on selling. And right now, I think, like, the RSN value has been so intrinsic to the value of organizations. Now I think organizations, are doing a little bit more diversification. You're seeing them with real estate to try to buoy their franchise values by having, like, not only the stadium, but like the land around it, developing whole neighborhoods to get different income streams. But for like, I don't know, decades, at least a couple decades, the regional sports network was like key to whether a franchise is worth like 1.1 billion or like 1.92 billion, especially in certain markets. The White Sox are doing okay, but like the Yankees with Yes Network, they were like the model, and the Dodgers with SNLA, which is very, very troublesome when it comes to rights deals and the Dodgers fans being able to actually watch Dodgers game on their preferred or maybe their unpreferred carrier, but the only carrier they can get based on like if they're living in apartments or something like that. So it's been, either great for some teams and huge for their established presences in their markets, or in the case of like the Dodgers, like chasing that dollar for and kind of foregoing some fans' satisfaction in order to get that money. But now, like, if these things are up in the air, I wonder if like teams would be willing to sell, to try to get out before these things kind of not maybe evaporate. Cause I think, as Ben Clemens mentioned, like it's not that they're unprofitable. It's that they were the purchased and a leveraged buyout, and they can't make the debt payments because, you know, some parts of the economics have gone under. And, you know, it's like with Toys R Us and other, you know, non-broadcast networks we've seen just get saddled with debt and then go under, even if they're doing, you know, fine on their own. Newspapers are another one. Like that's where I can speak to. Like newspapers used to make huge profit margins. Now they make small ones, but you know, if small ones aren't good enough, then that's when leverage buyouts come in and they just kind of, you know, sink a property in order to get them, you know, assets from them basically. But the regional sports networks are kind of treated in the same way as a gamble. The gamble didn't work out, and like, but they still should be profitable. Just more of a matter of like, are they going to be profitable long enough under the current arrangement for like a new owner to really get their money's worth, and for teams to get, you know, the kind of money they thought they would be getting, you know, or even like at a discount to where it makes sense for them. So it is messy. And I wonder like if it's a case where like teams aren't selling because, you know, they just can't count on that, or if they're going to wait like a little bit to see like if the new rights arrangement is somehow maybe even more valuable to them or as valuable to them, but more stable if the teams or the league has more say in who gets their product versus like leaving it to the sports networks to do all the distribution for them.
I did put up a poll on Twitter, which you can follow us on Twitter at Sox Machine. You can follow me on Twitter at SoxMachine_Josh. Which distribution model interests you the most in getting your favorite local MLB TV games? And the choices were the current regional sports network model, which every team has across Major League Baseball, or an MLB app subscription, very much like ESPN or Disney Plus, or even Netflix. And only 208 people participated in the poll, but 56% prefer the MLB app subscription, moving away from the regional sports networks. And I find that interesting because for YouTube TV, a subscription service that we both have, Jim, they really depend on these new deals. And there just seems to be a bidding war across the subscription platforms. Who knows, maybe one day Amazon will get involved as they got Thursday Night Football from the National Football League. And they're still hungry for live sports because live sports sells when it comes to subscription models. So YouTube TV, it's rumored that they may be getting NFL Sunday Ticket from DirecTV. And because if they get that, they'll sell more subscribers, they'll make more money, the product will be very valuable to Google. That's what makes sense at a business front. But from Major League Baseball, if half the league right now could suddenly be underwater with the regional sports network deals, maybe we have to go in another direction here, because the NFL doesn't have this problem. They don't have regional sports network issue. They just broadcast the games locally on Fox and CBS on Sundays. And then Amazon gets Thursdays and NBC gets Sunday night. And on Monday, it goes to ESPN. They have those deals in place because they don't play almost every single day. Major League Baseball, they could try their best to get those types of deals. And they have many deals with these national carriers, but you still have the local games for a lot of these teams that still need to get broadcasted. If the regional sports network model is too much risk, do you think we could see maybe a new streaming subscription service through Major League Baseball that pretty much nixes the whole idea of needing a regional sports network for the local MLB teams?
It seems like it could go that way. The one thing I wonder, though, is if you only sell to your customers, does that limit the amount of growth? Like naturally, when it comes to like the White Sox doing well, like I'd be curious, like in a case where like say White Sox TV ratings weren't good, then all of a sudden like, oh, they're in first place in August and running away with it. They look like they could be something. Will they get the upswing in ratings the way that they do over the course of a season? Like usually TV ratings, are quicker to respond to season trends than attendance. Like, you know, even if the White Sox don't draw 30,000 for a team that should draw 30,000 in terms of quality, like the TV ratings will be there. So if they're only selling their own customers, like, will they get that kind of upswing with ratings? Or is it a case where like, oh, it's just a kind of a closed wall garden here, and they're really only selling their old customers? And like for a sport like baseball that is trying to lower its median age and trying to, appeal to more and more people. Like, is that the smart move? Like, and maybe it is, because maybe like younger consumers are used to buying streaming services for everything, having like 5 or 6 subscriptions and juggling them back and forth based on like whether things are in season or whether they want to catch up on a show that they haven't seen before. And like, I want to watch an NBC. I want to watch 30 Rock. I need to get Peacock. Okay, I watch 30 Rock. I can cancel Peacock. Ted Lasso is back. I'm going to get Apple TV. Like, maybe they're used to this and we'll just kind of juggle back and forth based on whether they want to watch a team or not. But I could also see it being a case where, like, if NBA and NHL also having the same issues because they have Bally Sports RSN problems, like perhaps there's a case where, like, given that Jerry Reinsdorf owns both teams, like there might be a joint sports partnership that might kind of bridge the gap between both, where it's not just baseball, but maybe baseball can form partnerships with markets to push their own product, but maintain their rights.
The White Sox Bulls deal with NBC Sports Chicago expires in October 2024. So there's a deal in place for the next couple of seasons for the Chicago White Sox, the 2023-2024 season. But we'll see. Maybe Comcast and NBC, they're watching and what's going on with Bally Sports, and they're looking at their bottom line, Jim, and they decide, you know what? It's not worth it for us anymore to continue running regional sports networks. We're not making as much money as we were expecting in this type of deal. We can't continue carrying this model, so we're looking to sell. And obviously, Sinclair or Diamond Sports Group is looking to sell Bally Sports. And all of a sudden, Major League Baseball is looking around. It's like, oh my gosh, our 2 biggest regional sports networks don't want to be in business anymore. We should pivot. And I think eventually we could see it. It obviously has some tremendous impact in what the Bulls and Blackhawks would do in town if they're not all together. I could see maybe even, and as you mentioned, locally, they create their own subscription models, but it goes back to the BAMTech. Was that short-sighted to sell BAMTech to Disney while every team got a lot of money and the league got a lot of money? It sure sounds like you could use BAMTech right now to develop this type of streaming platform.
Like football, and like the big advantage the NFL has is like the games are freely available, especially like locally. Like over the air, you can get it with an antenna. Just CBS, Fox, 12 o'clock and 3 o'clock Central Time. Like, it's so reliable, so freely available. Occasionally you have the game on ESPN or Amazon or something like that. But when it comes to like just finding the product, having the product find you, Sunday when you're not doing anything anyway, or at least you can make plans once a week, like it's always going to be, I think, the dominant sport in America, just because the distribution problem is, it isn't a problem. The distribution is basically solved, and the rest is just money on the margins with these Thursday night games and these random streaming games here and there. Like, they're just picking up money here and there, but they're always gonna be front of mind because it's so easy to find. And that's my concern with baseball and other sports, is like if they just go down the streaming, just closing themselves off and cashing in and keeping the money themselves and having to be a separate app and a separate, if it's, does Roku have it? Does my smart TV have it? Do I need to get a different TV because they don't have the app? It's going to be messy, and transition could be tough. And you just hope that, you just don't close it off to where it's like a niche interest, because nobody can happen upon it accidentally.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what happens, but keep an eye, folks, on what's going on with Bally Sports, especially when the news does become official that they declare bankruptcy. And we'll see if this spurs Major League Baseball to make some really drastic decisions and a drastic pivot in the way that they broadcast their games moving forward, especially after the 2024 season, as the Chicago White Sox will be in that boat as the deal again expires in October 2024. with NBC Sports Chicago. But that will do it for this episode of the Sox Machine Podcast. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you just discovered the Sox Machine Podcast, you can subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts, such as Spotify and Apple Music. We also put episodes on our YouTube page at youtube.com/SoxMachine, which will encourage to get more and more subscribers, and hopefully more and more people watch videos as we surpassed 1,000 subscribers finally, Jim. So that's big news for us. So thank you guys so much for subscribing. And again, you can follow us on Twitter at SoxMachine, and you can follow me on Twitter at SoxMachine_Josh. If you enjoy our work and would like more, you can sign up to become a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/SoxMachine, where our Patreon supporters get exclusive content, ad-free versions of both the podcast and website. And when we have new Sox Machine swag in the new Sox Machine store, they're the first ones to receive it. Monthly plans start at $2, or you can save with an annual subscription. Again, sign up at patreon.com/SoxMachine. The Sox Machine Podcast is a production of SoxMachine.com, your home for all things Chicago White Sox baseball and part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. Alongside Jim Margulis, I'm Josh Nelson. Thanks for listening and watching.